The Secrets of Leycross Cottage, written by Michelle May Martin and narrated by Emma Isbell. Chapter 1. Coming Home. The cottage was barely visible through the steady fall of snow as Kylie slowed the car before approaching the gravel driveway. She came to a halt in the road just a few yards from the front gate. The last time she had been here was when her grandmother was still alive and seemingly in robust health. It had been the end of October, and she had made the same approach one late afternoon before Halloween. On that day, the glowing remnants of the recent bonfire at the side of the cottage sent sparks dancing into the air as the autumn sun slowly sank behind the trees. The cottage itself appeared to live and breathe as a warm glow emanated from the windows and a curl of smoke wound out the chimney. Kylie leaned forward in her seat and peered through the wet plops of sleet as they landed on the windscreen and were pushed aside by the wipers. It was late December now, but there was no seasonal welcome to be had. There was no warm glow from the Christmas lights, and the chimney stood cold and silhouetted against the grey clouds, pregnant with more snow. She gripped the steering wheel, closed her eyes, and held her breath. She could feel hot tears behind her eyelids and a painful lump in her throat. A car horn sounded and brought Kylie abruptly to her senses. A large black Range Rover loomed in her mirror. Realising that she was blocking the narrow lane, she flashed her hazards in apology and pulled into the driveway and up into the yard outside the stable block. The other car had already gone, and she was once again alone outside the cottage. What on earth had possessed her to come to the cottage on her own, in the evening and in this weather? She was regretting leaving Pippin with her parents. It seemed the right thing to do at the time, and of course Pippin was exuberant about holding court with her doting grandparents. But now Kylie was craving her little daughter's ability to shine a light of joy into every dark corner. The natural light was fading fast, and there was no time to waste being emotional. Kylie pulled on her anorak and woolen gloves. She had a small overnight bag on the passenger seat. Everything else could wait till morning. She turned off the engine, hauled her bag across and stepped out into the stable yard. The snow had been falling for an hour or so, and there was at least 2 inches settled on the gravel. She walked slowly towards the cottage with heavy footsteps and a heavier heart. She inhaled the icy winter air in long, slow breaths. Small clouds of warm out-breath quickly faded as they became one with the freezing stillness around her. The thatch was now completely covered in snow. With lights in the windows and a snowman in the garden, it would have looked like a scene from a Christmas card. On this particular December evening, there was no such festive welcome. Had the life of this darling little home been extinguished when its owner passed away? Kylie fumbled in the front pocket of her bag for the key that her mother had given her earlier in the day. The porch was a relatively modern addition to the house. It had been added in the late 1970s when the double-glazing salesmen outnumbered the general population by about 2 to 1. Kylie's grandmother couldn't have been prouder of her double-glazed porch and replacement windows. By some miracle, the PVC frames and the stick-on lead panels didn't rob the cottage of its old-world charm. They did, however, stop the icy wind blowing in from under the original front door that had remained on the inside of the porch. She had often wondered what, if any, protection from the elements this door had ever offered. Her hand trembled as she tried to force the key into the icy lock. "It's your cottage now, darling." She could hear her grandmother's voice in her head. "It was always meant to be yours." Mustering the strength, she turned the key and gave the door a hefty shove. A lump of snow slipped from the thatch onto the little porch and slid down the back of her neck, making her gasp with shock. It quickly melted on her warm skin and soaked the neck of her sweater. The inner door was also shut, but not locked. It could only be locked from the inside using a heavy sliding bolt. The wooden shiplap door was painted white and was badly chipped. It was easy to see that it had been painted again and again with layer after layer of paint over the years. It didn't seem that anyone had ever considered sanding down to bare wood before starting over. As she gave the old door a gentle nudge, there was a palpable feeling of life drawing her inside. It was as if the cottage had drawn its first oxygen-hungry breath in a long time. Kylie tugged at the crochet blanket that was neatly folded on the back of the chair and draped it over one shoulder and across her knees. Once again, memories of her grandmother came flooding in. The colourful little woolen squares of the blanket clashed horribly with the faded chintz of the armchair, but the soft, fragrant caress against her neck could not have felt more beautiful. She could smell an unusual pairing of her grandmother's fragrance and the balm that she rubbed into her arthritic knuckles. Lily of the Valley and Wintergreen would never accompany one another in any self-respecting perfumery, but to Kylie, on this cold and lonely December evening, it smelled like heaven. With her wine glass cradled in her left hand and her phone in her right, she began to scroll through her messages. There were only 4 unread messages, since she had left her parents' house earlier that day. The first was from her father. He had already given her a long list of do's and don'ts before she had left, but had then repeated the list in a long message, adding a few more instructions regarding the workings of the cottage. She quickly read it, making sure that she hadn't missed anything life-altering. The next message was from her sister, Mattie. It was a voice message. Mattie always left voice messages, much to Kylie's annoyance. It didn't matter how many times one replied with a typed message, Mattie would always come back with a voice message. More often than not, the message would sound stressed and rushed. She was always busy and always in a hurry. This was almost certainly connected to the fact that she and her husband had no less than 7 children. This had been achieved with 5 pregnancies over a period of 12 years. The first and the last pregnancies had resulted in twins, and they had announced their 6th pregnancy a few weeks ago before Christmas. "Hello, darling. Have you arrived? It's an utterly filthy night for driving, and Sarah and Rue said there's been a pile-up on the M3. Please let me know when you're safely ensconced at Granny's place." Mattie's words came out breathlessly, and her footsteps could be heard as she raced maniacally through her day. Kylie had absolutely no clue as to the identity of Sarah and Rue. Another one of her sister's idiosyncrasies was to drop names into conversations with no explanation as to who they were. She'd rattle out names in a way that one would feel that these people must be known or at least acquainted with. Kylie replied with a 2-worded message. "Arrive safe." She followed it with a couple of heart emojis and a snowman. The snow was largely undisturbed. There were a few bird footprints and something larger that could be a fox or a rabbit. Looking across to the chicken shed in the far corner, she could see that the chickens and the waterfowl had already been let out of the shed. They were pecking around at a pile of mash and a plastic pool of steaming water. There was a set of footprints leading across the orchard and over to the gate of the chicken run, but there didn't appear to be another set of tracks returning. Kylie moved closer to the window and squinted as she tried to get a better view of the chicken shed. The sun was bright, and it was difficult to see, but there appeared to be some movement inside the shed. Just at that moment, she heard her phone. Distracted from her mission, she tried to remember where she'd left it. It sounded again, and she suddenly remembered plugging it into charge before bed. She went into the little sitting room and retrieved it from the desk. She walked back into the kitchen, head bowed as she scrolled through her messages. Approaching the same window, Kylie looked up again, dropped her phone and screamed. Staring back at her, just inches from the glass, was a small figure, dressed in black from head to toe. From a small gap between a hat and a scarf pulled over the nose, 2 shining dark eyes met her own wide-eyed gaze. For a few seconds, they both stood, frozen in the moment. Eventually, Kylie, still shaking and trembling from the shock, picked up her phone and headed over to the back door. The mysterious figure turned and headed in the same direction. "I'm so sorry, my dear. I didn't mean to startle you. It must have given you quite a fright," said a soft, low voice through the woolen scarf. "Oh, no, please don't worry. I'm fine," responded Kylie, still a little shakily. "I'm Kylie Merriweather." Kylie smiled and put out her hand. The stranger quickly pulled down her scarf and tugged off her mitten before shaking Kylie's proffered hand. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Merriweather. My name is Agatha, but please call me Aggie. And you must call me Kylie. Please do come in and warm up a little," she said as she stood back and opened the door a little wider. "So kind, Miss..." "Kylie," Aggie said as she stepped back a little. "I must complete my jobs first." Aggie smiled and slightly bowed her head. Her dark eyes twinkled as she looked directly into Kylie's. Feeling almost as though Aggie were looking deep into her soul, she felt compelled to avert her gaze, but couldn't find the strength. They stood for a moment, with eyes locked, before Aggie pulled up her scarf, turned and shuffled off through the snow. Kylie shuddered with the chilly air being sucked into the house. She quickly closed the door and went back inside. Watching as Aggie disappeared into the shed and then reappeared holding another bucket of animal feed, she had an odd feeling about the young woman. She couldn't quite pinpoint it, but she felt sure that she'd met Aggie before. There was something extremely familiar about her, but she couldn't fathom how this was possible as she'd only recently started working for Catherine and certainly wasn't around on Kylie's last visit to the cottage. She appeared to be a lot younger than Kylie, although she spoke like someone a lot older. Contemplating this further, Kylie surmised that Aggie's speech was not so much like someone older, but more like someone from another age. Her turn of phrase was very unlike most of her generation. The 21st century beckoned once again as Kylie's phone beeped loudly. She checked her messages, and there were 3. They were all from her parents announcing their imminent arrival.